But the federal government could do a lot to help out the states by screwing down the maintenance of effort and making them come back to keep a level of support for higher education that needs to be there.
But I don't hear any conversation much in Congress about this issue that you're talking about. You know, they're discussing the runaway deficit and all the other things you hear, but you don't hear much leadership really stepping to the plate and saying, you know, the global enterprise that we're engaged in requires increasing talent, and so higher education, you know, it's praised in rhetoric, but it's not praised much in money. I don't, you know, I tell people who go into the state legislature that don't just allow people to tell you how much they love colleges and higher education. Ask them whether they're voting for taxes or whether they're voting for any increase in revenue. You can't spin rhetoric. So I'm distressed over the fact that we don't have a national conversation on the value of higher education in terms of the preparation for the future. I know the University of California at Berkeley, for instance, did a study that said that for every $1 that the state of California spends on higher education, it'll get $3 back in increased taxes from those individuals. So I hope we can ignite that conversation, but it doesn't seem it's happening now.
I think around the country, the frame on higher ed finance has been so about a negative reaction to tuition increases. The assumption is that tuitions are going up because institutions are spending a lot more money. The public doesn't see the distinction between price and cost. They don't understand the subsidies that are coming out from state funds. Gee, why would they wouldn't they understand higher ed finance? Isn't it simple enough? But I think that the reality is that the perception is that the money's there and that the institutions are not using it effectively.
And it doesn't help when the president of Kaplan gets on TV and says the reason it's going up, the cost, tuition, is because we're putting in rock climbing walls and day spas at our universities. And then puts it in a book which is favorably reviewed in a Wall Street Journal. Well, it's nonsense. I mean, everybody knows, you know, that you can correlate the increases in tuition almost exactly with the decrease in state investment. And that our actual costs have been going down, meaning what does it cost to produce a credit hour? And I'll bet that's true for most of the people here. And maybe not all for good reasons. I mean, we may have a higher student-faculty ratio than we like. It's not all efficiencies that we might be proud of. Maybe it's some efficiencies that we're proud of, new IT systems and lower travel and, you know, other things like that. But that's what's out there, that it's going up because it's like healthcare. It's just the cost is going up. People are being better paid. You have too many empty suits that are making a lot of money. You're treating them with gentle hands and you know, creating a lifestyle, not just and I mean, obviously, some of these criticisms, there may be some truth somewhere, sometime to them, but the basic problem is that we're in a co-pay situation. We've gone to the pharmacy, and the medical insurance company does not want to pay. And therefore, the cost to the consumer of the pharmaceutical has gone from 20 to 40 bucks, and they're yelping. They're unhappy about that. But that is the reality.
But let's take that back now to state policy. And the story about what California higher education needs and the agenda setting and the truth-telling, the analytical frame that could get through some of this hasn't been there, has been weak for many years, and now it's gone. What is your thinking about what California needs to do in addressing policy capacity? The speaker's got a bill to create another CPAC. Is that an idea whose time has come yet?
Well, I don't think that's the particular solution. Obviously, what happened to California was that first, of course, in 1978, they passed Prop 13, which eventually reduced the income, the revenue to the state of California, and that's become sacrosanct, so I guess we can't do anything about that, although many of the commercial enterprises are profiting from it a lot more than the residences are profiting from it. But some way, somehow, you know, as Mark pointed out, why do, at the University of California, it's my understanding that right now the students are paying over 50% of the cost of their education. That happened directly as a result of the slashing of state budgets to the University of California. He talked about the way, why we're turning away maybe as many as 400,000 students. We know we're turning away a lot of students that can't get a class in California community colleges. We're doing that because they cut our revenues and we couldn't do more with less. So we have to do less with less. And, you know, the one driver that you did mention was Medicaid, but there's another driver in California, and that's corrections. We now spend 10% of the state budget on corrections in California, which is more than we spend on UC and CSU combined. You know, it seems like we're more interested in prison stripes than we are in graduation gowns. And that was the direct result of the public getting all excited and passing something called 3 strikes, and therefore sometime we all are for warehousing violent criminals, but sometimes people are put away that shouldn't be put away, and you put them away at $40,000 a year for 25 years, you spend $1 million. So, you know, there's some things inexorably that are growing, like health care and corrections, and who gets caught in the squeeze? Higher education.
Well, Charlie, I'm going to put you in the spot about what's the state policy response. There's only, you collaborate now in the Education Roundtable and you do good things, but is it possible to do what needs to be done in state policy exclusively through cooperative efforts of systems? What's the right way to go?
Well, you know, we do have to do more with less, and I think, you know, we've proven that. Your Delta project had the 20 most efficient universities in the country that had more than 15,000 students. 10 of those 20 were CSU institutions as far as being efficient and having the highest graduation rates. But I think that the policy folks, the political folks, have got to get their priorities straightened out. And as Jack said, you know, you don't need a master plan funded for the prison system the way they do it in this state. There are 12,000 women in California that are in prison for non-violent crimes, like writing bad checks, you know, smoking a little dope. You know, that's just crazy that they, you know, lock these people up, as Jack said, for, you know, minimum mandatory sentences. And so, you know, we've got a whole set of the wrong priorities in our state.
And I don't...
And, you know, one thing none of us have said, and you know, talk about the master plan, okay? It's pretty damn hollow right now because no one is funding the master plan in California.
You know, what I was going to say, I have to admit, I've never been a great fan of these coordinating boards.
Yeah.
I like being uncoordinated, sort of leave me alone. But we're not going to coordinate our way out of this. This is not, you know, we can do some economies of scale. We already do that. You know, we already, I think we're on this, don't we have the same website for our travel and so forth? So we're, you know, we're doing a lot of
energy projects.
We do a lot of that stuff, and I'm for it, and Charlie's for it, and it's great. The problem is, one, the lack of cash. Another is, which Governor Brown has talked to me about, is, you know, he's persuaded that the current model for higher education may not be for the long run, that we ought to, and he talked to me about e-learning and some other things, and he may be right. I mean, we have a very expensive model for higher education. It seems to me it's worked very well for this country for a very long time, but at some point we're going to have to think through how do we change our delivery systems, maintain our quality, do what we need to do, and live with some budget realities that do not seem to be ebbing away from us. They seem to be getting worse. This crisis since 2008 wouldn't have been nearly as bad if this were some blip, but it's not. I mean, it's part of a 25-year trend nationwide, maybe except North Carolina and a few other places.
But, Mark, one of the things, and they talked about this the other night, 68% of the K through 12 students in California are Latino. Yeah. The demographics have changed significantly since the master plan was designed. And to try to figure out how to improve what's going on in K-12 and provide the information that the schools need, at the same time getting students prepared to be able to do college work is one big challenge in California going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, I'd like to take a second and talk about Common Core state standards if I can. I mean, this is a good example of a major policy initiative that's underway right now to try and tackle that huge issue of under-preparation in high schools for college level work. And I know that California's at work on it. Are you going to be able to pull it off? Are you going to be ready to get those standards in place and to accept what comes in those standards and certify it as college ready?
Well, one of the things that our Student Success Task Force, our first recommendation had to do with greater collaboration with high schools. And we have been obviously working with Mike Kirst, who is working on this Common Core standard in California. He's head of the State Board of Education, and he's very close, of course, to Jerry Brown. So we will work on that because over 70% of the students who come to the community college have to take remedial education. So clearly, if we could, if we could get that down to 50%, we could save a lot of money. There's no question of that. So that is, I think it does have promise, but we are in California, and Charlie just emphasized that, we have 68% Latino, and we look also at the non-English speaking population, the low-income population, and that's, I'm not suggesting that in fact, we should serve. That's the very value of the public schools, always has been. And so we need to step up to that challenge. But I do think closer collaboration between colleges and universities with the high schools so that the high school teachers can understand what it is to get somebody college ready. We've sort of tacked on to your program, EAP, which is early assessment in the junior year in California, to take a test that says, all right, math and English. If you pass both of them, you don't have to take assessment. But if you fail to pass either one of them or both, then you ought to be spending your senior year not in frivolity, but in getting yourself ready in English and math. So we are turning to that, but we still we spend, and I'm sure this is typical of many states, we spend an unusually high amount on remedial education.
Kristen, I think your institutions, along with Charlie's, but you may actually edge them out, prepare the majority of, Charlie's got the majority of teachers. Teacher education's a big one for you. What kinds of things are your institutions doing now to think about changes in pre-service and in-service to get to these standards? Do you have any kind of a place at the table on that one?
Well, as far as the teacher preparation and the Common Core standards, I think the Department of Education under Tom Torlakson and Michael Kirst are prepared. We've been working with them. It's clear that we have to have students better prepared coming out of high school, and especially to institutions, the nonprofit institutions where average tuition is $38,000. Taking remedial math and English is just not cost effective. So teacher preparation is key to it. Certainly working with the Teacher Credentialing Commission in preparing the workforce and coming around this systematically from an education perspective and a policy perspective. And I want to go back to the policy perspective in the state of really coming around higher education and a plan that serves the students that we know are coming up the pike. By 2040, California is going to be a majority Latino state. So we have to have a model in place and a plan in place that is going to get students through the door and complete them And so what we haven't talked about is what does the new higher education system look like? What are those hybrids and distance education, and how are we going to use those tools to meet this? I mean, we're very much where I think where the master plan, Molly mentioned at the beginning, the setting is the same. Capacity, how do we have efficiencies because of the state budget? And we need to really look at that collectively, and I think it's going to be these leaders who need to come around that, and working with K through 12 in a way we didn't before in 1960.
I think Berkeley scholar John Douglas, who's sort of the keeper of the master plan for those of you who don't live and breathe this all the time, and he argues that the master plan's on life support. He agrees with you that if it's not dead, it's in the critical care ward. And he says it's not just money; it's a lack of imagination about my words. I think he probably is more polite about alternative ways to deliver, not just distance-based, but I think he thinks there needs to be new hybrid institutions that pull together community colleges with regional institutions in ways that haven't been really thought about. Your institutions have always collaborated. Is there a need for an explicit new hybrid model? I mean, does that make sense in this environment?
Well, I think very well of John, but when I see words like hybrid, I begin thinking that we have a metaphor in search of a problem. I mean, I'm having difficulty knowing exactly what that's going to mean. I mean, I could imagine a world where more students came through the community college system that was more the norm than it is today for both Cal State and the University of California. But I don't know, and we may need to develop alternative educational delivery systems. I do understand that, and they might not all be e-learning experiences. There may be something else that we haven't imagined. I also agree that we're really in ruts now. We almost have. It's very hard to see new solutions. You know, I look at the to give you an example, I see these articles on gaming, and it always piques my attention. You know, about how good these gaming companies are at engaging our young people in a way that's very hard for universities. And is there some gold there in terms of curriculum reform? And some people are working on it. But you know, the idea that some sort of collaboration between community colleges and regional universities will deal with this resource issue, deal with this mission issue, deal with the curricular issues, I'm skeptical. I mean, I need to, maybe I just haven't seen John's details, but I'm very skeptical. What does it mean to have a hybrid university? How would it look, how different would it look from what we have now? And why do we think that model would be more availing?
Well, I can't argue it, but I do think that it has to do with focus as much as anything, and identifying those institutions within the community colleges that are already most focused on transfer, and consolidating those resources with the four-year institution. So it's a more aggressive attention to seamlessness and getting some of the organizational boundaries out of the way. I believe actually that the innovations in all of higher ed and in California on the academic side, on the teaching side, and on the learning side may be more profound than the innovations we've seen in the administrative configuration side and in the organization side. I think that's true across higher ed. We're more stovepiped, I think, on the administrative side for all kinds of reasons.
Well, in a few states, they have experimented with community colleges offering four-year degrees. I know they're doing that fairly extensively, I think, in Florida. I was approached on that maybe a year or two ago, and my main hesitation was I saying, you're not giving us enough money to do the job you're asking us to do. I mean, we're having to turn away students. How in the world would we suddenly find the money to do this additional job if you would give it, you know, I never have found fault with the master plan. I've just found fault with the fact we don't fund it. I mean, there's not any, I think the delineation of function was brilliant. I don't find anything wrong with that. And we need to tweak it a little bit occasionally. I don't say it's it's sort of a golden rule that you can't violate, but it's still a good basis. It's just underfunded. And you know, we've got a real problem in California, for instance, in adult education. That was done partially by community colleges and partially by K through 12. Well, now K through 12 is abandoning it. They've decided that when they were given flexibility, that their main job was K through 12. So there are these immigrants and others out there who were served by adult education, like in Los Angeles. So happened in Pasadena when I was president of that college, we were through our non-credit program. Once again, the Little Hoover Commission says we ought to turn that all over to community colleges. And I think we could do a great job at it. But, you know, to suddenly give us maybe several million students without any additional money is folly.
Well, Jack, I mean, I think objectively California community colleges are funded almost at the bottom nationally, but a lot of that's because of your tuition levels. Your state subsidy levels in California aren't that far off national averages. It's because of the allergy in this state to tuition levels in community colleges that would allow you to get probably where you need to go. I'm not going to ask you what you think about that. I mean, that's we'll let you do something else.
I will say that since we went from 26 to 36 to 46 in 3 years, we're moving toward solving that problem. But I hear you, and I think that's a legitimate discussion that we need to have. And as I said, we have already started prioritizing the individuals who get to profit from community colleges, because we think that we've got to serve the basic issue of career technical education, transfer, and remedial education. And so that probably, I think it needs to be, as I said to the legislature once when asked about raising tuition, I said I would like for it to be gradual, predictable, and that we get all the money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that should go without saying. Charlie, it's possible people here don't understand or can't fathom some of what you have to navigate in the next 7 or 8 months with the multiple initiatives on the ballot and what that does to your budget. I've heard you talk a little bit about what's on the ballot. Could you share that with the audience, and then we can...
Well, in January, the governor came out with his budget, and Mark and I have learned what the word trigger means. Last year, the governor came out with the budget and told Mark and I that he was going to cut our budget $500 million, and so, you know, we could plan on that. But then he put a trigger in there to cut us $250 million more than
so $750 total
if the revenue wasn't there. So this year, the governor came out with his budget, and he level funded UC and CSU for next year. However, he put a tax plan initiative in his budget to raise about $7 billion, and has said if that does not pass, then he's going to cut UC and CSU $200 million the 1st of January, mid-year. Well, you know, we'll have to reduce our budget by $400 million to catch up with that mid-year. However, only in California. Now, there are 60-some initiatives potentially going to be on the ballot in November 2012. That won't happen, but there's that many have filed with the Secretary of State to give notice that they want to get signatures for the initiative. Well, there are three tax initiatives. The governor's, which is going to raise $7 billion, and he is going to increase the sales tax by ½ penny and tax on income of over $250,000. Now, there are two labor organizations, the teachers' labor and the nurses' labor groups. They have a millionaire's tax, which really looks good. It's only going to be on millionaires, and actually it's going to raise about $9 or $10 billion, so a little bit more than the governor. UC and CSU both have earmarks in the millionaire's tax, which may be a little bit more than what the governor said. Then there is a third tax initiative that Molly Munger, whose father is Warren Buffett's partner. And Molly Munger has a income tax increase on the ballot. For everybody that makes more than $7,000 will pay a higher income tax. And Molly Munger's tax was going to raise about $13 billion forever. So everybody's tried to talk her out of her initiative. And as she said, I'm going to write every check personally that I have to pass this. Now, the problem is, if 3 tax initiatives all get on the ballot, hell, they'll all go down because people will be confused. They'll vote for one or not another one, and none of them will have enough juice to pass.
It's my understanding that Molly Munger's initiative is for K through 12.
Well, there's a little bit of money for
a little bit.
So you've got 3 things on the ballot with tax, major pieces of revenue in there, but also on the ballot are earmarks for the spending side for higher ed.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, the way I look at it, and I agree with everything Charlie said, is you really need to reach a treaty with the legislature and the governor, because at the end of the day, there is no maintenance of effort provision in any of these, as far as I know. So the people who will decide where the money goes will be the Assembly and the Senate and Governor Brown. So it makes it much more complicated, and they have preferences with regard to these ballot initiatives, and some they don't like so well. But none of them are really self-executing, because if even the millionaire's tax, if it's $500 million into the university, the money could be pulled out somewhere else. So you need to have some sort of reconciliation with the legislature and the governor. So I'm very concerned. It is the conventional wisdom to all go down if there are 3 of them on the ballot. And I think people are trying to consolidate them, but so far there's no agreement.
Nobody's going to blink yet. So we've got this 2 really powerful things happening at the same time. We've got greater economic and social need for increasing degree attainment. We've got students coming to college in greater droves than ever. All the hard work you've done to raise expectations and the outreach to non-traditional people's paying off. They're showing up at your doors. And we've got a national agenda, including a president, more than ever really calling for post-secondary education as part of what we all have to be collectively investing in and paying attention to. And that's happening just exactly at the same time that we have this wave of populist rebellion against spending, highly politicized, gridlocked legislatures around the country, and public opinion about higher education very much hinged on negative reactions to tuition increases. So we've got a delivery mechanism and a capacity mechanism where the brakes are going on even as the demand is there. I mean, at some point, is this a moment in time that will self-correct?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. You know, I mean, actually, higher ed's pretty popular.
Yeah.
Just no one wants to pay for it. Right? I mean, that's the polls I see. I think ACA's done some good work in this area.
They think they are paying for it.
And yeah, I mean, the attitude is, you know, why raise my taxes? Why doesn't the government pay for it? And so I really don't know. You know, I tend to think that these trends are not surface trends, that they're really systemic. This country has an aging population. Even though 68% of our public school students may be Hispanic, and those family sizes tend to be larger and the average age lower, the country's aging. And to me, it's no accident. You have Social Security lock boxes, and you put, what was it, $500 billion into pharmaceuticals for the elderly. Now, I mean, you know, that was positive for them. You know, my mother benefits. I like it, but they're not the poorest group we have in this country. We did get the health care reform, but barely, and we'll have to see how that works. So, you know, I'm worried that there's something deeper going on. You know, and is it that Americans are self-satisfied? Is it they don't want to educate other people's children? What is going on here? And so I wouldn't be in this job if I weren't an optimist. But I'm worried that, and by the way, the other thing that's going on, despite all the nonsense out there, is it appears as if the private returns from higher education have been increasing
Never
for
been higher.
decades. So, I mean, even though no legislator will say it, you look at it and say, wait a minute, you're gonna bring in a lot of money as a veterinarian or a physician or even a highly paid nurse and so on and so forth. So you have a certain instinct for privatization that maybe wasn't there in the 1950s. And you have the same point I was making, but percentage of families with children under the 18 has taken a nosedive in the 2000s as compared to the baby boom years. So I think we need to keep fighting the tactical battles, but I'm very worried that there's something much, much deeper going on, that it's going to be much more difficult to influence.
You know, I also think that, you know, the economy is very weak, and it's going to remain weak, and unemployment is going to remain high for some time. And until those things turn around, things are not going to get very much better. We're in for a long, cold winter.
I'm not sure if we have time or we're set up for comments or questions from the audience. If someone does want to levy a question to someone on the panel, please do go find your way to a microphone. I have to say, I think it's a very crowded media environment, and I think that that's part of what makes the policy environment so cluttered. But I also would like to say that I think that the social democratic need for getting higher education attainment where it really needs to go has never been greater. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to figure out how to do that despite really very tough odds. It's going to take different types of institutions. We have to be ready to reconfigure how we deliver. I think we're already doing a lot on the instructional innovation side, and I think we can and need to do more on the system side. I don't know what that means, but this is too big a public responsibility, public duty to walk away from. We can't let that happen on our watch. So and I know you're all doing it. You're all in there slugging. So it's it's the best of times and the worst of times, and California's making more progress in increasing access and opportunity and degree attainment than any other place in the country. You're doing it on less money. You're objectively more efficient than you were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And you're also, the air's coming out of the tire slowly. The capacity to do what you need to do and what the state needs you to do isn't there. And stabilizing that has to happen somewhere between what you're all able to do and what has to happen at the policy level. So there you go. That's the bellwether. There's California, and whither the rest of the country.